So it's Richard Donner's seminal 1987 action blockbuster Lethal Weapon, by hitting 4K Blu-ray restored theatrical and director's cuts. Figures a good time to go through the first 3 films of the franchise, and figure out what comes to these supposed director's cuts. Also try to figure out if these were actually approved by Richard Donner himself. So with its theatrical release in March of 1987, Lethal Weapon went on to gross $120 million worldwide of a $50 million budget, making an instant success for Warner Bros. Pictures, which they're very eager to capitalize upon, with 3 successive sequels up to 1998, and altogether, the franchise grossed $955 million at the worldwide box office. And of course, you tack on home video rentals and sales, definitely makes it a billion-dollar franchise for Warner Brothers, who would be definitely eager to kind of continue milking the franchise after apparently it ended in 1998. And so this is where the director's cuts come into the picture, where we got things on VHS. There are a couple of Laserdisc releases both in America and Japan, a couple other countries here and there. But it seems like Japan got the most out of the entire thing, because in the United States, all the films got widescreen Laserdisc releases, but only the 4th film got AC3 digital 5.1 audio, because all the other films of the franchise were released on the format prior to that audio format debuting on Laserdisc in 1994. And so we get up to 1999 with the Japanese Laserdisc box set with the first 3 films in the director's cut form, they all get AC3 digital 5.1 remixes. But it wasn't until 2000 that it came out on DVD, and they were anamorphic, widescreen, plus DTS 5.1. This was even a step beyond where the Laserdisc was, because it's anamorphic, it's DTS, plus the Dolby Digital 5.1, definitely getting in different ways to kind of expand things out in terms of the quality of what you're getting, the value of what you're getting for buying it on the new format at this point in time. Now, the original theatrical cuts would get their own separate DVD releases at the time, and be the only ones ported over to Blu-ray several years after this, with the additional scenes from the director's cuts only available as deleted scenes on those sets, which kind of makes the entire extended version of these films kind of absent for any future home video releases for about the next 25 years. And they're starting to be addressed and kind of go through a lot of different interesting things about whether or not these were actually properly approved director's cuts from Richard Donner, or just a marketing move to milk more things out of fans of the franchise. But I will discuss this at the latter end of the entire video here. Now, the original Lethal Weapon has the most additions of all 3 of the films here, with just additions. There are no subtractions on any one of these 3 films, but famously, as the entire film was being developed, as was originally from the script from Shane Black, Donner loved the entire thing because it was very character-centric, but he felt it was a little too dark, a little too heavy to a certain degree, so he wanted to kind of find a way to kind of lighten it up, kind of give it more of a balance between the drama and the levity. So he brought in screenwriter Jeffrey Boam to kind of rework some elements of the entire thing, and it seems like even in editing, they're still trying to find a little bit of that balance, kind of figure out what the most efficient elements of the entire story are, because on the Blu-ray set, there's even additional footage that was not included with the director's cut that still remains as deleted footage from the film. So there's still things like, things in the script, we shot it, but like it still feels like, okay, well, that feels extraneous, or kind of affects the pacing negatively. So I could definitely see how Richard Donner and his acclaimed editor Stuart Baird kind of went through the film and found like what works the best, what is the most essential stuff, what gets to the point, what's the most succinct version of the film that hits all the beats, that still maintains a very entertaining but very impactful film overall. So seeing this director's cut as it is, a lot of interesting little scenes, because they are good scenes, they're very good scenes, but I can see reasons why some of the stuff gets trimmed out going to the theatrical version there, I think, because as we get the stuff, all the stuff's like first half of the film, and a lot of it's kind of these little introduction scenes, stepping stones until Riggs and Murtaugh finally intersect and become this partnership in the entire film. So after we get the actual introduction scene with Martin Riggs inside his trailer, kind of waking up and dealing with things and showing his bare ass and stuff like that, we get a follow-up scene to that where he's about to kind of get ready to leave and stuff like that for his job. And the fact is, he's in this kind of afraid mentality and whatnot. He just smashes a beer bottle on his TV, which wrecks the TV, but he goes over the wedding picture of him and his now deceased wife, as we find out later on in the film, and says,
I'll buy you a new one.
And so it's a nice little thing. You can see, like, okay, it's a nice little kind of additional thing to kind of, again, the stepping stones to learning more about the character through actions, a little details laid out as the entire story progresses, but not entirely necessary. You find out this information later on in ways that are more pertinent and much more pointed overall, and when you have a character like Murtaugh learning about who Riggs is and where he's coming from and various other things like that. So the information comes up later on in the film, so it feels like it just becomes redundant. So if you're trying to find out the most efficient version of the entire script and the entire version of the entire film, it's easy to cut this scene out. It's nice, but not essential. Which moves into the next scene, which is Roger Murtaugh at the gun range by himself, and it's kind of a thing that we see later on in the film. Like another thing that feels redundant from what we see later on when it's him and Riggs at the gun range, where Murtaugh does the entire thing with his hand shaking, and he does the entire thing to kind of like calm himself down, and he kind of goes out the range, kind of proves to himself that he can still do the job, even though he's facing that edge of retirement to a certain degree. But it's a fine little scene, but it doesn't really give us any information that we don't get later on in the much more extended sequence with Riggs. The next added scene is the fact that it's one of the best deleted scenes from a film. The one thing that, like, if there's any one scene absolutely everyone praises that's not in the theatrical cut, is a scene of Riggs in the schoolyard with a sniper. Because Riggs runs to this call about the entire thing, and he kind of goes up there with the other cops. He's kind of discussing the situation. He's like, oh, well, SWAT team's on the way. I'll kind of turn away. But then he finds out, well, this guy's a bad shot. And he kind of like hears that there's other people getting hurt and stuff like that. And it's like, he turns back around. And he's going to march out there. He's going to bait the guy to kind of expose himself. Because, like, if he's a bad shot, and as we find out later on, Riggs is a crack shot marksman. And it's so powerfully executed to establish all the little things that, one, there's a compassion underneath Riggs. But there's also the death wish. He's willing to march in these extremely dangerous situations that none of these other cops would ever go into. Like, they're like, I'm not going out there. You're insane. And you see the entire reaction he has at the end of the scene. So it conveys a lot of things to the audience about what Riggs, what his mentality is, what his psychology is, stuff like that. And so it's like, it's building those things up, but as you get certain other scenes later on where Roger Murtaugh is present to kind of witness stuff and react to it and absorb it, such as like the jumper scene later on, it builds more. That scene is much more pertinent to the storytelling and building everything up. And the other thing is the fact that a lot of these scenes early on with Riggs and Murtaugh kind of separate from the story from one another, just kind of slow down the first act of the film. As I watched this film about 7 months ago, actually on Christmas Eve, I was like, I want to experience the director's cut. I want to revisit that version of the film. I just felt like they're good scenes. But I can see why, in terms of like, that kind of slows down the two leads getting together early enough in the film. They're not entirely necessary to telling the story because the information we get in those scenes comes up later on, and those scenes are much more pertinent to building a relationship between Riggs and Murtaugh. And after that, there's only two other additional scenes. One is after Riggs does the entire Coke bust in the entire Christmas tree lot. You go back to his trailer where he's kind of bringing the new TV set. Well, if you cut the earlier scene where he breaks the TV set, there's no reason to have a scene where he brings in a new TV set. And so that rolls the entire thing of him getting extremely depressed and getting on the verge of eating his gun in that regard. So, extremely powerful scene. But the only other scene after that is kind of a nice little scene here. That's, again, a nice little character scene. You can definitely see you could keep it or get rid of it. It's kind of an either-or situation, but if you're trying to trim just a little extra stuff on the entire film, I can see why you would kind of push this one by the wayside. The fact that after Riggs has spent the night over at Murtaugh's house, had the dinner, spend time with his family, get to know them, stuff like that, and have a little bit of chat on the boat and everything like that for Murtaugh's retirement, he goes off and picks up a prostitute and pays her $100 just for her to come home and watch the Three Stooges with him. And it's a really nice, sweet little piece. It's like, that's all he wants. He wants that little companionship. And it kind of goes off from like, he just spent this night with this wonderful family. It makes him a little bit pining for just a little bit of that companionship. So it feels like a cause and effect type of thing, but you're not really losing much. There's not like there's something else in the film that is detrimental to that not being present, but it's a nice little extra scene there. It gives a little extra sentimentality to Riggs in that regard, so it helps a little bit on his character set, but I do think this is the most interesting of the directors, because I get into, not to kind of bury the other two in that regard, but this is the most substantive scenes that there are to add back into the film that are very entertaining. There are some things that are very substantive in the character development of these guys, and some extremely excellent scenes in that regard. The sniper scene is just awesome. It's just an awesome scene altogether. It's an interesting cut. I still would prefer the theatrical cut in general, because I think it's much more of a succinct, lean film that gets all the same points across, with just fewer bits of things going on in the entire thing. But still, they're all very good scenes in this director's cut that I do recommend going checking out, regardless of that type of thing. Now, moving on to Lethal Weapon 2 with all its diplomatic immunity. Not a whole lot here. Nothing that really kind of feels like it justifies a director's cut, because it's only got 3 kind of inconsequential scenes added back into it. One is an early scene, where after the fallout from the opening chase sequence where Riggs wrecks the Murtaugh family station wagon, the other thing, after they go out of the police station and they kind of talk with a auto body repair shop type of guy, and he's giving an assessment about all the different damage and everything like that. It's a little bit of banter going back and forth. It fills in a little bit of connective tissue, but not terribly essential scene. A little thing here and there. The next thing is, after they get the assignment to do the protective detail on Leo Getz, Joe Pesci's character, Riggs and Murtaugh go to the hotel, and Riggs gets kind of sidetracked to kind of flirt with a couple of ladies in the pool. Just have a little banter back and forth, and kind of affection towards him, and kind of want to court his attention, stuff like that. So it's just a little bit of an aside. There's nothing really substantive here. And the last little thing, like I said, there's very little here. Start thing after we get the sequence where, after the hotel thing, and they fall into the pool from stories high, and they go back to the Murtaugh house with Leo Getz, and Leo's explaining the entire thing about how money laundering works, and he gets along to the entire thing of remembering this entire house he was taken to for the interview with Hans to kind of get the entire gig to kind of do some of the money laundering stuff for them. There's an additional scene here where they're kind of overlooking the sort of sprawling landscape of Los Angeles, and Leo's kind of going through this process in his head in a very humorous fashion, as Joe Pesci is very adept out through the entire franchise, of trying to remember the actual address number. And so it's kind of a shoe leather type of scene. It's kind of like it's trying to connect dots to certain things, it kind of be connective tissue type of thing, but as you go from the previous scene, where he says, I kind of remember what the entire thing is, the house on the stilts and stuff like that, and have them in the next scene, in the theatrical cut, just kind of rolling up the entire thing, it fits, it connects, it's just fine and whatnot. So it's like an extra scene that the screenwriters and whatnot probably felt like we need to kind of have it be a little bit more of a challenge for them to kind of put the dots together and kind of get A to B to C, but it's not really necessary type of thing. It's a nice little scene, but it doesn't really add anything. And that's the thing with the director's cut of Lethal Weapon 2, nice little scenes, but they don't really add anything to the story. But Lethal Weapon 2 is still one of the best action sequels that's ever been made. Some people feel like it's definitely better than the original because they up the action quotient. I think the story's a little bit more original to a certain degree, even though the entire thing of the South African politics is very much dated for its time, very much that type of thing, but still the action set pieces, the quality of the comedy, everything's built up from the first film, refined, kind of made a little bit more explosive to a certain degree, kind of just everything comes up on a better quotient without losing a lot of things that made the first film work very, very well. So, even though it's a couple of scenes that don't add much, it still maintains one of the best sequels that is definitely out there in that regard. But get up to Lethal Weapon 3. And interesting other things, like, it was one of those things like, okay, Lethal Weapon 3, they were kind of feeling out that maybe they'd be closing out the franchise at this point. Just make it a trilogy and nothing else further. But obviously, they went with the Lethal Weapon 4 at a certain point in time where there's a lot of interesting details in how that thing kind of came together in a very quick fashion. You could go off and enjoy the commentary tracks that Steve Fraser and I did for the entire 4-film franchise many years ago. Get a lot more insight in that regard. But for Lethal Weapon 3, the director's cut on the whole thing, again, adds in only a couple minutes worth of stuff. At least has a little, maybe a sliver more kind of things going on for it than Lethal Weapon 2 does in the director's cut territory. The first scene that were added in this thing, as, again, Roger's kind of like eyeing retirement, kind of getting up. He's like the last 6 days. And his wife, Trish, who's wonderful in the entire franchise and very loving, but also very kind of like, I want to keep you safe. And so it's the entire thing of her going up to Roger at some point in time, this additional scene, and making sure that he takes his body armor, his bulletproof vest with him. And so that's kind of this is a nice little additional scene because it adds a little extra context. Because as they go off a little bit later on, and they have everyone at the gun range, and they got the armor-piercing rounds they got from the entire attempted armored car robbery earlier in the film, and it kind of gives more context, because it's like, okay, Trish made him put it on because she's very protective and very worried for him, but seeing these things are out in the wild in that regard, it just rips right through it. And it just deflates the entire thing, so it's like, it makes him more vulnerable in that regard. So it's a little something. It's a nice little poignant type of thing. It's not too long of an additional scene. I think it adds a little extra context to that little piece in the entire film. But another little thing is like, okay, it's another piece of like kind of connective tissue, because they bring back the carpenter who was in the second film, building up the addition on the Murtaugh house. Well, now he's kind of working on Riggs' trailer. And the entire thing where they kind of go out and they're kind of having a little banter and stuff like that, and kind of Carpenter gives off the invoice to Riggs, and he's kind of calling highway robbery to a certain degree, but Murtaugh's daughter, Ann, comes in because, as the entire plot of the film is, you have this ex-LAPD Sergeant Jack Travis, who's actually stealing arms from the LAPD impound, the evidence lockers, stuff like that, and selling them off on the street. So you got all these massive weapons and all the type of stuff kind of getting off and kind of escalating the violence out on the streets of Los Angeles. And unfortunately, one of these gets in the hands of a couple of kids, and one of them ends up getting gunned down by Roger Murtaugh, who ends up being a friend of one of his own sons. And so it's like one of these things, like it just emotionally destroys Murtaugh. And this entire little scene here that's added into the director's cut has Rianne going and visiting Riggs, saying, my father never came home last night. And that kind of gives the entire thing of Riggs to go off and see him at the boat, which is in the theatrical cut. So a little bit of connective tissue, but I kind of like this one being here in that regard, because it is referenced that, like, hey, your daughter came to see me and stuff like that, and they have this little argument between the two of them on the boat. It's a little connector thing. I can see you kind of like, maybe pull it out at the film if it feels like it's getting a few minutes too long. Feels like it's something you can pull out, but I feel like it's a nice little piece of work. And of course, actor Jack McGee gets to come back in the entire franchise for the entire little scene here and the whole thing. So, nice thing for him to get back in the entire cut of the film. But the last thing we have is kind of a thing that does feel a little extraneous. Not really necessary to be there, because after get the funeral for the kid and kind of Murtaugh's kind of rededicated himself back up on his feet to kind of like go off and shake people down and get to the heart of the entire matter here. You go to the character of Tyrone, who's all kind of tied in with the character of Jack Travis. He's very much in collusion with him and buying arms and all that type of stuff. And Murtaugh starts going off and kind of shaking him down and being very intense in the whole thing. And the additional scene tagged on here is the fact that Riggs, Murtaugh, and Rene Russo's character, the internal affairs detective of Lorna Cole, kind of do this entire thing where, like, they got him underneath the wheel of a car and they're gonna threatening to run him over, stuff like that. It guess it's the same point. I guess it's the same point of not having the scene. You could have it and not have it and still achieve the same thing of getting to the point of interrogating one guy after another to get to the heart of this entire scenario. So it's slightly entertaining, but I don't feel like it's a very necessary scene in that regard. So it's kind of back and forth. Like, 3 has like some things that feel they got a little more substance, a little more pertinence to the overarching qualities of the entire film. But this scene just feels like I could probably live without it. And that's really all there is. For 2 and 3, there's very lean type of things added into these extended cuts of the entire film. And the interesting thing to discuss is the fact that they are labeled as director's cuts, and Richard Donner directed all 4 films of the franchise. Lethal Weapon 4 only has 1 edit in that regard. But the interesting thing is there's a lot of stuff going around for like years and years and years, like all over the place. IMDb trivia, Wikipedia, discussion forums, everything you go after. There's a lot of stuff going on, saying a lot of things that these are not true director's cuts from Richard Donner, that he did not approve these. They just slapped the name of director's cuts on the films as a marketing gimmick. Instead of just saying, oh, these are extended cuts, they want to say director's cuts. These are what Richard Donner wanted to have in the first place, but didn't get in the first place. And the thing is, I cannot find for the life of me an actual quotable source from Richard Donner saying any of this stuff one way or another. I found a lot of people all over the place saying stuff like, Richard Donner refused to be involved with any home video release that include these director's cuts. That's possibly why the original Blu-ray releases only include the theatrical cuts, because those ones, the big box set I have, has interviews with everyone. Donner, Gibson, Glover, Shane Black, everyone. Everyone's available to talk about it, was involved with discussing the film in those featurettes, and Richard Donner did commentaries on the theatrical cuts of all 4 films. And the entire thing is, there's no such involvement in that regard of interviews or featurettes or commentaries or whatnot on any previous release of that regard. So, one way or another, it seems a little hard to kind of distinguish overall, because again, I did as much looking around as possible. I did dated custom searches on multiple different search engines, trying to find anything that was a quote, an interview, an article, anything that would substantiate saying Richard Donner said this specifically. The only thing I found, there was an interview in 2001, the year after they debuted on DVD, where Donner was asked about doing some kind of special edition DVD on the film. Said, no, we've never done any special editions, but I'd like to go off and do director's cuts of the films. This is after the director's cuts were already released of 1, 2, and 3. Now, we can't ask Richard Donner for any further context because he's no longer with us. But that's the only quote I have regarding him talking about the director's cuts. If there's something else on there, I have not been able to find it for the life of me. I put calls out on message boards, out on social media. I even put it on Patreon. One guy responded saying he swore he saw some sort of like paid advertisement, like an infomercial type of thing, with Richard Donner addressing you guys, calling up or whatnot to order the director's cuts on DVD, and Richard Donner actually saying these are my preferred versions and stuff like that, him endorsing them. Fortunately, at the time of recording this, I was not able to find any such video evidence in that regard. So, memories can be faulty at certain points of time. That's entirely possible. But if I don't have everything in black and white, or if I don't have any actual video evidence of him saying it, I can't really entirely substantiate whether or not 100% certainty whether or not Richard Donner actually approved these or he didn't. Because interesting enough, right around the same time these came out on DVD in 2000, he had been working on the special edition of Superman the movie. He oversaw that with additional footage added back into the film with brand new sound mixes and all different things. So he actually approved that with Warner Brothers at the same time they're doing a Lethal Weapon director's cuts. So it'd be interesting the fact that they would consult very deeply with Donner on a new cut of Superman the movie, but not with the Lethal Weapon films. Very interesting. I think it was a bit odd in that regard. But as you kind of look at the entire thing, like, okay, the first Lethal Weapon has very substantive scenes that I feel like they can add to the film, but they do feel like they maybe negatively affect the pacing to a certain degree. It feels like the structure is maybe not quite as good as it could be with those added scenes in there, and so the theatrical cut works perfectly without them. So you can see maybe back and forth, maybe saying, hey, I'd like to maybe do an alternate cut, put these scenes back in as an alternate version of the film, same as he did, again, Superman the movie. But of course, it comes up to something else that's kind of relevant to Superman. There's the TV cut way back in the day where, like, these are things usually not approved by the directors. Like, usually the producers or the studio would kind of like, oh, these are going to have their network television debut on, like, ABC or something else like that back in, like, the early or mid-'80s. And there's like, oh, we could throw some extra scenes of this whole thing, expand it out, we get a lot more ad revenue, kind of more ad spots, stuff like that. So we just slap in whatever we've got, and whether there's effects or finish or stuff like that or not, doesn't really matter, just kind of like grabbing more money. And this was not, this version of Superman the movie, which is almost 3 hours long, was not approved by Richard Donner. He has specifically told it off in many different ways, saying it's a terrible cut of the film, it's more of an assembly cut, it's not a proper version that he would put his name directly on as an approved version of the film. But with Superman the movie doing a special edition, specifically a special edition, never called it a director's cut, but still something that he oversaw, he approved, and saw it as a positive alternate version of the film they put his name behind. With the Lethal Weapon director's cuts, it's kind of nebulous, and like I said, since Donner's not around, we can't get new information from him, can't get him interviewed in any type of way, but some of these pieces of information seem to align with what we have, because now after Don's passed, now we have the entire thing of the 4K edition with both versions restored, but his director's commentary for the theatrical cut is not available on the 4K edition, so there's none of those old featurettes poured over to the 4K, so suspiciously, seems like possibly that could be the thing that he said, I don't approve those director's cuts. They're not my cuts of the film. You guys decided to put those together on your own accord. I don't want to be involved in those. My cuts are the theatrical cuts at this point in time. That's what I'll put my name behind. And if you release those in a certain way, you want to do a special edition, I'll be involved with it. But if you want to include those other versions, those are not my cuts. I will not be involved with that. So that seems to fit the evidence that we have available right now. So really what's more important is what people feel about these cuts of the entire film. Because like I said, the director's cut of the first film is still good. It's still a good, great film. And those other scenes do have substance to them. Again, they negatively affect the pacing for me in a certain way, but I still feel like there's substance, there's qualities that are very good to get out of those scenes. They're very much worth watching in that regard. And how you feel about the second and third films in those regards, in those extended versions, is something you can definitely discuss in the comments below. I definitely invite that type of commentary, and I'm glad, one way or another, that both cuts are being preserved in 4K. And there's a lot of things I kind of talk about in the entire retro video series, like if we've got multiple cuts of the film, all people really want is kind of a choice and preservation. Like, present everything side by side, and everyone can make a choice what they want. Like, Ridley Scott could say, this is my approved version, but if you like these other versions that are here too, for you to enjoy and kind of experience and stuff like that, or James Cameron, or whoever else there is, Steven Spielberg, anything like that, you give them a choice. You can watch this version, you can watch this first one, but at least the director says this is the version I prefer, but if you prefer something else, here's an option to watch that in the same or at least similar quality in that regard. And I kind of get buried back in Laserdisc and DVD and stuff like that, and kind of get it old and crusted and go out of print and stuff like that. Keep it updated and preserved for the modern times. So I very much appreciate what Warner Bros. Did in that regard. If you do lose some of the other stuff from the previous block set, we have this current 4K edition, but if they end up doing a full 4K restoration on the entire franchise, we'll see what happens if they got a bonus disc and they kind of port things over and stuff like that. We'll see where things go in that regard in due time. But that's why I'm holding off on getting the 4K edition of Lethal Weapon, because as it seems with the A Nightmare on Elm Street series, they put out the 4K of the original last year, but now they seem to be doing a full box set of all the Robert Englund and Freddy Krueger films very shortly. And so we pretty much have to double dip. You bought last year, but now if you want to get the entire box set, and you got to buy it again. I feel like, well, maybe I'll hold off on Lethal Weapon 4K, wait for them to do a box set maybe a year or so, and get everything in that regard. But we'll see what things happen and how they go along in the near future. But guys, if you like me kind of exploring these films and seeing how they kind of changed in that regard for these additional scenes, what they added, what they didn't add to the entire film, how they kind of affected the entire pacing of the film and stuff like that, definitely invite your comments in the whole thing. If you like everything like that, definitely hit the thumbs up in that regard. Subscribe if you haven't. You can join the Patreon. You can do anything monetarily every month, or use the Super Fit Things feature in that regard. But guys, thanks much. Take care. Bye-bye.